If you've spent any time with me on the Crab Champions Discord or watched any of my content, you will know I'm all about that critical damage. Now, I've made this video as a way to show you why crit is incredibly strong and also some of the nuances that you didn't know about or maybe haven't really thought about. This is not supposed to be a guide on crit, however I am going to teach you about how it works and some of the more complex elements of crit. So the first big thing about critical damage is that its calculation is made at the end of your damage and not at the beginning of your damage. The calculation on the screen right now explains how it works, and whilst this looks a little bit scary, it's actually pretty straightforward. When you land a crit, it takes your base, weapon, global, and flat damage, times it by your critical damage, and the output is your crit. This is awesome because it means that regardless of what you pick up, your critical output will always be getting stronger as time goes by. The next big thing to know about crit is that almost everything can crit. This includes your proc perks, grenades, melee, damage over time, auras, even your critical perks can crit on each other. The Arcane Elemental is the only element that can crit, however, it's worth mentioning that poison will also increase your critical damage. And just like before, it takes all of your damage and then does the calculation, which means whatever build you're running, crit is always going to be beneficial.
Yes!
Now, the most underrated thing about critical perks is that they have a completely universal percentage. This means that regardless of what weapon you pick up, the percentage will always be the same. So for example, if you pick up Hot Shot on both the sniper and the minigun, they will have the exact same percentage. If you pick up any of the proc-based perks like critical arrows, critical blasts, or even mega crit, they will have the same percentage across all weapons. This makes the critical loot pool unique because every other mod in Crab Champions has been adjusted depending on the weapon. Speaking of loot pool, there are 9 items in the critical pool, which compared to other pools is absolutely absurd. For comparison, there are 45 weapon mods. That's not including perks and ability mods. So, unlike other chests, you could be searching for ages before you get the weapon you want, whereas with crit chests, you're almost guaranteed to get the perk you want. Plus, once you get either Sharpshooter or Hot Shot, it opens up the rest of the loot pool for you to dive into. Even without Coral Amulet or big chests, you're going to be able to stack up your critical perks really quickly. And the good news is, the majority of them are in the rare category. Now, the most overpowered part about crit: critical arrows and critical blast. The way these two perks work is every time you crit, you have a percentage chance to cause a flat amount of damage. The higher the rank of the perk, the higher the percentage chance and damage. The absolute beauty of these perks is that they are affected by all of your crits. Whether you crit with Bubble Shot, your grenade, or even your aura, they have a percentage chance on all crits. So to repeat, any crit has a percentage chance to proc these two perks. These perks work on everything. This in itself makes crit absolutely insane. It's like having Bubble Shot proc on your dagger arc, or having a Spark Shot pop out when you do a melee attack. These two perks complement every single proc-based build in the entire game and will enable you to do some very serious damage early on. And just like all damage, these perks scale with your global damage, and funnily enough, they can also crit on themselves, causing them a kind of chain reaction type deal. Also, it goes without saying that critical lightning, it's an instant pickup when you have crit. It works on every single crit, so compared to critical blast and arrows, you've got 100% uptime on all of your crits. Moving on, there are 3 items that increase your critical damage. Power Punch, which adds 33% increased critical damage. The Ring of Precision, which adds 150% increased critical damage. And Critical Thinking, which multiplies your critical damage by 33%, whilst also reducing your non-criticals by 15%. The reason this is insane is because critical thinking is one of the few perks that are multiplicative rather than additive. This means that once you get your critical damage slightly higher, you can use critical thinking to multiply it even further. After all this big talk about crit, here's my advice on how best to build up crit, just like I've described in the video. First up, you're going to need to get yourself either hot shot or sharpshooter in the critical loot pool. I personally prefer to go for hot shot as it's twice as good as sharpshooter, and whilst I'd always say go for hot shot, it's entirely up to you. Next up, you'll need to find yourself one of the critical proc perks like critical arrows or critical blast. I'd always opt for critical blast over arrows, but ideally you'll want both of them eventually. Once you have either of these perks, you'll want to concentrate on upgrading them rather than upgrading your critical hit chance, because the higher the rank, the higher the percentage chance to proc and the damage. Whilst you can get more critical hit chance, I find it's a lot better to focus on the proc perk first, although it's worth saying that 12 to 20% critical hit chance is more than enough initially. Once you feel well equipped, you can start building critical damage. It's best to pick up more power punch initially and then build critical thinking. However, if you have a very high critical hit chance, you can predominantly focus on critical thinking. There's no right or wrong answer here, I just tend to pick up whatever I can find. Now, with high projectile weapons, you'll be having a great time with these critical proc perks, but you might be thinking about those slower weapons. This is where our good friend Time Shot comes in to help. Time Shot is a weapon mod found in damage chests that converts your weapon damage to damage over time. The beauty of this weapon mod is that it has a chance to crit on every pulse of damage, meaning every single tick of damage can potentially trigger one of your critical proc perks. So rather than one chance of proccing your critical perks, you now have multiple chances, therefore making these perks super viable on those slower weapons. And with that final bombshell, that's all I have to say about crit. I hope you've learned something today, and I've really tried to cram absolutely everything I know into such a short video. If you have any questions or want me to cover something else in the future, please do leave a comment or come over to the Crab Champions Discord, and I'll catch you in the next one.